Let us explore the next creational design pattern, that is the prototype design pattern. According to Gang of Four, it states that specify the kinds of objects to create using a prototypical instance and create new objects by copying this prototype. Well, what does that mean? How to implement it? Let's dive in and check it out. I'll begin by writing a simple class by name student. Any class, whether you tell or not, will be having a default constructor which would now look like this. I would like to store the name, gender and school of every student, so I'll be declaring variables like this. During object creation, I would like to set all the three values, so hence a constructor like this I would like to generate. I won't stop there, I would also like to generate the getters and setters for all the three variables. Finally, I would also like to display the contents of these variables, so the shorthand way is by generating the toString method. Inside the toString method, along with the other variables, I would also like to display the reference of the object, so hence I will call in the hashcode method inside it. A simple class is ready. Let us now create objects of it. I will create a new class whose name is main, which has the main method inside it. Before I now create any objects of student, let me set up the scenario here. We'll just assume that the student class that I just now created is being owned by a school by name St. Joseph's, which happens to be a boys' school. Keeping this in mind, let us now create objects. First, I'll now create a new student whose name is Barry, gender is male and school is St. Joseph's, and the reference of this object I will store it inside S1 like this. I will create one more new student whose name is Harry, gender is male and school is St. Joseph's once again, and I would like to store the reference inside S2. Finally, one more student I would like to create whose name is Wally, gender is male and school once again is St. Joseph's, and I will store the reference inside S3. Three objects we have created. For confirmation, I would like to print it by using the system.out.println. When I now execute, you can now see the three objects have been created with different values. Well, though we have now created object, this happens to be a very inefficient approach. Why inefficient approach? Because we have used the new keyword. Please note, any day if we use new keyword, it is a very costly approach, because if we are using new to create any object, first an empty object will be created, the variables will be allocated inside it, the defaults will be assigned, and then the constructor will be executed. You can see multiple steps are taken inside when you are now using the new keyword, and to do this multiple clock cycles are also used. And if you look closely in our example, all the objects has almost the same data, except for the name, everything is same. So if you look closely, to do same thing we are wasting multiple clock cycles, which is not a good approach. Then what is the good solution for this? Yes, the solution for this is the prototype design pattern. How to implement it? That's what I'll be teaching you next. The first step is to create an empty object and set only the necessary data to it. In my case, I'll be creating an empty object of student and I'll store the reference inside prototype. To this empty object, I'll be setting the gender to male and I'll be setting the school to St. Joseph's. For clarity purpose, I'll be printing the contents. When I now execute, you can see an object is there which has only the values, that is the gender and the school. Of course, the name won't be there because that we haven't set it yet. What is the next step? The next step is not to create new objects, rather create a copy of this prototype. Well, how to create a copy of prototype? People think that just by making an assignment operation like this will do the job, but please understand it won't work. Why it won't work? Because when you created the first object in the memory, it will now look like this. When you perform assignment operation, what happens is contents of the prototype will be copied inside S1. What does prototype has? It has the reference to the object, so hence reference will be copied inside S1. So S1 will also be pointing to the same object. So basically what you have copied the reference and not the object. Still you have only the same object. But we don't want to copy reference, we want to copy the object. How to do that? What we have to do is we have to come up with a mechanism such that the object is able to copy itself. In other words, we have to give a method such that we are able to clone the object. How to do that? Well, it's very simple. Inside the student class, you can give a method Name of the method can be anything of your choice, but according to the standard, the name has to be clone. Inside the clone method, create a new object and pass in the current values. In other words, you'll have to use the this keyword and the same object has to be returned. Back in the main method, you can call the clone method and a new object for you will be given with the current values. In other words, you are able to clone the existing object. To the cloned object, I'll be setting the name as Barry. When I now execute, you can now see two objects are there. Both of them has different values and more important, both the references are different. In other words, both are pointing to different objects. Let us now create some more clones. I will create one more clone and I will now store the reference inside S2. To this clone, I will now set the name as Harry. One more clone I will create and I will store the reference inside S3. And to this clone, I will give the name as Wally. I would like to print the contents, and when I now execute, you can now see multiple clones are now created with multiple values. Well, though we have created, this approach is still invalid. Why? Because externally we are calling the clone method, but what does clone internally uses? It still uses the new keyword, which happens to be the invalid approach once again. Well, don't worry about it. Java provides a predefined way to create clones. How is that? That's what I have to tell you. We'll first get rid of this line here because it's an invalid line. The first step is the student class must now implement a marker interface by name clonable. Marker interface means it is an empty interface. You can see the clonable interface is an empty interface. Still we have to implement it. Why? Because it is a way to intimate the JVM that the objects of this class will be cloned in the future. So hence you have to implement it. Once you have implemented it, come back inside the clone method, and inside the clone method you just have to call super.clone. The moment you tell like this, automatically a cloned object will be given to you. You just have to return it. Please understand, the cloned object will be of its super type, means it will be of its parent type. Who is the parent of student? Nobody we have mentioned. In other words, by default, the object class will be the parent of student. In other words, the object will be of type object, which needs to be downcasted to student type. You will like this. Once you have done it, I would now like to rewrite this statement into three different statements. First, I would now like to create a reference variable S. I will now store the reference of the clone inside S, and then I'll return S. Next thing that you have to understand is, while cloning, anything might happen. The JVM doesn't want to take the responsibility. In other words, a checked exception will take place. So in other words, the programmer has to be handling this inside the program itself. So I will now be surrounding this statement within the try and catch block. If you do this much, automatically you will be able to clone even without using the new keyword. Whether really it will work or not, let's check it out by executing the program. When I now execute it, you can now see the output remains the same. Well, if you do this much, we have implemented the prototype design pattern. According to the gang of 4, prototype design pattern tells, specify the kinds of objects to create using a prototype instance and create new objects by copying its prototype. That's what we have done. We first created one object prototype, and then we did not create new prototypes or new objects. Rather, we now created objects by now copying the existing prototype, and that is what we call it as prototype design pattern. I hope it is completely clear. If you have any queries, put the questions in the comment section below. I'll get back to you. Please do subscribe and turn on the notification to be notified. Why? Because upcoming is a factory design pattern which you don't want to miss. Thank you.